Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everyone. Nice to meet you again. Let's talk further about the concept of an open economy. Having understood the basics, now we're going to learn about the long-run model of the open economy. We're not talking about the formula or the measurement anymore. We're now talking about the determinants of all the variables we have discussed. We are talking about the market for loanable funds in an open economy, the market for foreign currency exchange, and the connection between the two markets, and of course, the resulting equilibrium in each and interrelated market. Since we're talking about long-run model, we're concerned more about the real variables. We will deal with the real exchange rate, not the nominal exchange rate. We will only involve transaction, situation, or policy that affects real variables such as real trade and real output. Okay, the explanation will be straightforward. I would say this first. Basically, there are two markets in long-run open economy models. First is the market for loanable funds. What you have to understand is here we're talking in the perspective of domestic economy. Supply of loanable funds, as you may observe from the graph, is funds supplied by domestic agents. They are domestic household and domestic government. Their saving, or the national saving, is the source of supply of loanable funds in the market. Therefore, any change affecting national saving will also affect the supply. This is exactly the same as the supply of loanable funds as we are talking about in the closed economy before the midterm exam. The curve is upward sloping because domestic private saving is affected by domestic real interest rate. On the other hand, what we call demand in the market is demand for loanable funds from, again, domestic citizens to conduct investment. But since we're now in an open economy, domestic citizens may still invest domestically, thus the I or invest abroad, either directly through FDI or indirectly through portfolio investment, thus the net capital outflow. Investment made by domestic citizens is again negatively affected by domestic real interest rate. When the real interest rate is high, the cost of borrowing is high too, so there will be less incentive to invest, or there will be less demand for loanable funds. The story, however, doesn't end here. In an open economy, high domestic real interest rate may attract foreign savers to purchase assets in domestic economy. But be careful. The capital inflow here is not interpreted as the addition to the supply of loanable funds since it's not part of the national saving. Hence, supply curve will not be affected. Instead, with the capital inflow or lower net capital outflow, there will be less demand for national savings or the loanable funds because part of the domestic investment now is financed using more funds from abroad. So it's clear now both I and NCO are negatively affected by real domestic interest rate. Then the final part of the market is the equilibrium. The interaction between supply and demand for supply of and demand for loanable funds result in equilibrium loanable funds and equilibrium of domestic real interest rate. Please keep it in your mind. Equilibrium of real interest rate is not set by anyone. It results from the interaction of supply and demand in the market. Therefore, it can only change if something happens to the supply or the demand. The second market is the market for foreign currency exchange or market for real exchange rate. In this market, we're talking about the determinants of real exchange rate of the domestic economy and their foreign counterpart economy. Just like the real interest rate, the real exchange rate is also determined from the market, not fixed or set by anyone. If the real exchange rate in question is rupiah, or we treat Indonesia as our domestic economy, we're dealing with supply of and demand for rupiah in the market. Supply of rupiah means amount of rupiah to be exchanged into foreign currency. It is not country's money supply, remember. It is the excess of national saving that flies abroad in the form of net capital outflow. From the discussion earlier, we know that NCO or net capital outflow is affected by real interest rate, not real exchange rate. Therefore, since NCO or the supply of rupiah is not affected by real exchange rate, the supply curve is vertical. Yes, of course, when rupiah is appreciated or now more expensive relative to Malaysia's ringgit, for example, rupiah can buy more Malaysia's asset, the foreign asset, and vice versa. But the relatively lower cost of purchasing Malaysia's asset will be cancelled out with the relatively lower benefit received from owning them. The dividend from Malaysia's asset will be in ringgit, so when it is converted to rupiah, the asset owner will receive less rupiah. That's the basis why Manq in his book assumed no effect of real exchange rate to net capital outflow. Other than that, of course, the assumption is made to make the situation simpler. Okay, let's now turn to demand for rupiah. Demand for rupiah comes from net export. When Indonesia exports more of their goods and services abroad, the sales may be in rupiah or in foreign currency. Whichever currency being used, it results in more demand for rupiah. If the transaction is in rupiah, foreign citizens would need to exchange their currency to rupiah for buying the goods and services. Hence, higher demand for rupiah. If the transaction is in foreign currency, domestic citizens who have received the foreign currency need to convert the money to rupiah for those can be spent in the domestic economy. Thus, again, higher demand for rupiah. Why is the demand curve negatively correlated with the real exchange rate? The answer is quite straightforward. We know that the real exchange rate shows the relative price or the terms of trade of two countries. So when real exchange rate is high in our case, it means goods and services in Indonesia are relatively more expensive than its counterpart. There will be less net export as a consequence or less demand for rupiah. On the contrary, if the real exchange rate is low, goods and services are now cheaper, so more net export and more demand for rupiah. Hopefully clear? We have talked about the two markets, market for loanable funds and market for real exchange rate. From the first market, we get the equilibrium of the domestic real interest rate. From the second market, we get the equilibrium of the real exchange rate. If we take a look at the two markets altogether closely, there is a link between the two markets. The link is net capital outflow or NCO. It is part of the demand for loanable funds in the first market that is affected by real interest rate. NCO is also a supply of the domestic currency in the second market that determines the real exchange rate. So, with the NCO link, we can have simultaneous equilibrium in the two markets. This is how the two market graphs are linked with the NCO. We have downward sloping curve of NCO because of its negative correlation with real interest rate. And the amount of NCO is directly derived to get the supply curve of the real exchange rate market. With this framework, we can evaluate how the trade balance, the real exchange rate, and the real interest are determined in the market. Once again, I have to remind you, both equilibriums of real interest rate and real exchange rate are not set. They are determined from the market mechanisms. So any event, situation, or policy that affect S, I, NCO, and NX will affect the equilibrium. Okay, I stop here. Hope you understand all the explanations. We have discussed about the two interrelated market in long-run open economy. And in my next presentation, the continuation, we'll be talking about some events or situations that could affect the equilibrium of the long-run open economy. Thank you for your attention and please watch the next presentation. See you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.